There is a garden on Birch Street that was not there before the winter George Marsh died. It began with a single rose, a climbing one, coral-colored, the kind George always said reminded him of the sky over Lake Michigan on a July evening. Lillian planted it in February when the ground was still half frozen, and her neighbors thought she had perhaps lost her senses a little. She drove the stake in with a rubber mallet, wearing George's old flannel work gloves that were 3 sizes too large for her hands, and she said nothing to anyone about why she was doing it. She just knelt there in the gray February yard, pressing the cold earth down around the base of that small, leafless cane, her breath coming out in white clouds that vanished almost as quickly as they appeared. Welcome to the Lamplit Hour, where every story is a small light left on for someone who needs it. If stories like this bring you comfort, take a moment to subscribe and stay a while. George Marsh had been a quiet man by habit and a generous one by nature, the kind of man whose presence you did not fully appreciate until the chair he always sat in was suddenly, permanently empty. He had retired from the post office after 31 years, and after that he spent his mornings reading the newspaper cover to cover at the kitchen table, and his afternoons in the backyard with a cup of weak coffee, watching whatever was happening in the sky. He was not a dramatic person. He never made speeches, but he had a way of paying attention to things that made whoever he was with feel attended to as well. And that is a rarer gift than most people realize until they no longer have it. He and Lillian had lived in the house on Birch Street for 44 years. They had raised 2 daughters there, Diane, who now lived in Portland with her husband and her 3 boys, and Carol, who was only 40 minutes away in Granger and came by every Sunday without fail. They had painted the house twice, replaced the roof once, and fought exactly the kind of small, ordinary fights that married people fight and forget and forgive. They had grown old together in the way that people who truly like each other grow old, gradually without much fanfare, finding that the person across the breakfast table had become as natural and necessary as breathing. George's heart had given out. On a Tuesday in November, he had been folding laundry. Lillian found him on the bedroom floor, the bed sheet still half folded in his hands, and the expression on his face was one she could not quite describe afterward, except to say that he had looked peaceful, which was exactly the kind of man he was. The kind who could not even leave a room without being considerate about it. The first month after, Lillian moved through the house the way you move through a place where all the furniture has been rearranged in the dark. She kept reaching for him in small, ordinary ways, turning to say something at dinner, or waking at 3 in the morning and listening for his breathing before she remembered. Carol called every evening. Diane flew in for 2 weeks and slept in the guest room and cooked soup and wept quietly in the bathroom when she thought her mother couldn't hear. Friends from the church brought casseroles. The house filled up with flowers that eventually browned and were thrown away, and then it was January, and it was very quiet. It was in January that Lillian started going through George's things, not to remove him, she told Carol firmly, but to understand what he had left behind. She found his old post office jacket still smelling faintly of him, which she hung on the hook by the back door where it had always hung. She found 17 years of pocket calendars in the nightstand drawer, each one filled in his small, neat hand. She found a coffee can in the garage full of seed packets, most of them unlabeled, tied in rubber bands by year, and she found, tucked inside his copy of a field guide to North American birds, a torn piece of paper on which he had written a list of flowers, just a list, no explanation. Roses, it said. Coneflowers, Sweet William, lavender, black-eyed Susans, morning glories for the fence, peonies if there's room. Lillian sat on the edge of the bed for a long time with that piece of paper. George had never been a gardener. He had mowed the lawn dutifully and pulled the occasional weed. But the yard had always been, in both their understandings, Lillian's territory. She could not imagine when he had written the list, or why. She could not ask him. So she did the only thing that made any sense to her in that moment. She went to the hardware store in the morning and bought a climbing rose. By March, there were 7 plants in the ground. The rose was already showing the first faint red nubs of new growth, which Lillian took as a sign of something, though she would not have said exactly what. She had added a row of coneflowers along the back fence because George used to say that coneflowers looked like small, determined people standing at attention, and that had always made her laugh. She put in Sweet William near the porch steps because that had been George's father's name, William, and George had loved his father the way quiet men love the people they most admire, without much saying so, but completely. She worked in the mornings mostly, while the air was still cool. She wore the flannel gloves. She talked sometimes to the plants, but mostly she talked to George. She had not planned to do that. It began almost by accident, the first time she was on her knees in the dirt, pressing in a coneflower seedling, and she heard herself say, out loud, in an ordinary voice, "You would have laughed at me, buying 6 of these when I only meant to buy 2. And then she waited, the way you wait when you've said something that deserves a response. And of course, there was nothing, only the robins in the oak tree and the distant sound of someone's lawnmower 2 streets over. But she did not feel foolish. She felt for the first time in months as though she had said something real to someone she loved. After that, she talked to him every morning. She told him about the weather and what Carol had said on the phone, and a funny thing the mail carrier had mentioned about the new postal trucks. She told him she had finally figured out the television remote, which had always been his job, and that she had watched 2 documentaries about Antarctica, which she thought he would have liked. She told him she missed him in the afternoons most, when the coffee was made and there was no one to drink it with. She told him she was planting the list, every plant on his piece of paper, she said, all of them, even the peonies, if there's room. She said it the way you say things to someone you love, which is to say without any performance, without any careful choosing of words. Just the plain truth of what she was thinking, offered up like a cup of tea. April came warm and fast that year. 3 doors down from Lillian lived a man named Ray Kowalski, who was 72 and had been mostly housebound since his hip surgery the previous fall. He had a daughter in Cincinnati who called on Sundays, but his wife had left him some years back, and the house had the look of a place with no one in it, even when he was home. He had taken to sitting on his porch in the afternoons, wrapped in a blanket even when it was warm enough not to need one, watching the street with the patient, slightly sad expression of someone who has a great deal of time and not quite enough to fill it. Ray noticed Lillian's garden, the way you notice something that grows, not all at once, but gradually, one morning at a time. He had watched her out there in February driving in that stake, and he had thought, poor woman, grief will do strange things. But by April, the yard was something else entirely. There were colors coming in along the fence line, and a small stone path had appeared through the middle of the bed, and there were clay pots along the porch steps with herbs that Lillian had labeled in her handwriting on small wooden stakes. Basil, thyme. Rosemary for remembrance, said one. And Ray had to look at that particular pot for a long time before he understood it. One afternoon, he walked down to her yard, slowly with his cane, and stood at the edge of it, not sure if he was welcome. Lillian was kneeling between the coneflowers and what would turn out to be a row of black-eyed Susans, and she looked up and said simply, "Come in if you like. Mind the path." So he did. He stood there for a while, just looking. Then he said, "My mother grew black-eyed Susans. Polish tradition," she said, though I think she made that up. Lillian sat back on her heels and smiled. "George always said they look cheerful, even in a bad year." Ray nodded slowly. He was right about that. He paused. I'm sorry about George. Thank you, she said. He would have been embarrassed by all this fuss. She gestured at the garden, which was already, in April, beginning to look like something with intentions. But I think he would have liked it eventually. Ray came back the next afternoon, and the one after that. He did not offer to help. He could not kneel without it being a whole production. But he sat on the low stone bench Lillian had put near the path, and he talked while she worked. He talked about his mother's garden in Milwaukee, which had been full of vegetables and marigolds. He talked about the neighborhood when the Birch Street houses were newer and there had been more children. He talked about his hip, which he didn't usually discuss because he felt it made him sound old. And Lillian listened to all of it with the easy attention of someone who has been married a long time and knows how to hear what a person is really saying beneath what they say. By May, there was lavender along the south edge of the bed and a peony bush in the corner that would not bloom until next year, but was already leafing out with a kind of urgency, and morning glories starting up the fence in long green tendrils. The garden had begun to look, to anyone passing by, intentional and alive. Several neighbors had slowed down to look at it. A few had stopped. One of them was a woman named Dorothy Park, who was 68 and had moved to Birch Street only 2 years prior, after her divorce, and who had not quite found her footing in the neighborhood. She lived in the yellow house directly across the street, and she had the self-contained quality of someone who had learned not to need people too much, which is usually what needing them very much looks like from the outside. She had a job she did from home, and a cat, and a small balcony garden of her own, mostly succulents, which require little and survive almost anything. Dorothy had been watching Lillian's garden take shape with something she did not immediately identify as longing. She had been watching Lillian out there in the mornings, talking to herself in the quiet way of someone deep in conversation, and she thought there was something courageous about it. One Saturday, she crossed the street with a jar of honey from the farmer's market just to give herself a reason. And Lillian invited her in immediately, without any of the caution that loneliness sometimes teaches. Dorothy crouched down to look at the morning glories and said they were beautiful. And Lillian said, George wrote them on a list. I didn't even know he paid attention to flowers. Dorothy looked at her. He left you a list of what to plant. I don't think it was for me, Lillian said. I think he just wrote it down one day because he was thinking about something, but it found me anyway. She straightened up and dusted the dirt from her gloves. That's the thing about people. They leave more of themselves behind than they know. Dorothy was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Would you mind if I came and sat with you sometimes? I work inside all day, and I think I need... She stopped. I just think I need to be outside more. Come anytime, Lillian said. If this story is staying with you, a quiet light helps me keep the lamp lit for others. June settled over Birch Street like a long breath. The days grew long and warm, with that particular quality of early summer evenings when the light seems to last longer than it has any right to, and the air smells of cut grass and something flowering that you cannot quite name. Lillian's garden was by June a real thing, a living, complicated thing with a personality of its own. The roses had climbed most of the way up their trellis and were opening in clusters, that coral color George had loved, and in the evening light they had a warmth that made people slow down when they walked past. Diane came in June, without her husband this time, just for a long weekend. She walked out to the garden on the evening she arrived, while Lillian was making dinner inside, and stood in the middle of it for a long time. When she came in, her eyes were red, and she said, It's so much. I didn't expect it to be so much. Lillian handed her a dish towel to dry her face and said simply, he would have pretended to be indifferent and then stood outside looking at it for an hour. Diane laughed, which was the kind of sound that has crying inside it, and then they made dinner together and talked about the boys and what Diane was reading and whether Lillian thought she should take a trip somewhere. Maybe. "Where would I go?" Lillian said. "Anywhere," Diane said. "You've never been to Vermont." "George always wanted to go to Vermont," Lillian said. And then they were both quiet for a moment, the way families go quiet around the shape of someone who is no longer there. "Maybe next fall," Lillian said. "Maybe I'll go." She meant it. That was the thing. She meant it. Ray had taken to coming by every day. Sometimes twice. He had started to help. Not with the kneeling, but with the watering and the mulch bags, and with building a proper wooden trellis for the morning glories, which had outgrown the string she'd given them. He turned out to be a better carpenter than either of them had expected, and the trellis was sturdy and square, and Lillian said it was the best thing in the garden, which made Ray stand a little straighter than usual. Dorothy came almost every evening, bringing things, a cutting of her rosemary, a forgotten packet of zinnia seeds, a book about cottage gardens. She and Ray had taken to each other in the way of two people who recognize in each other the loneliness of living alone at an age when you expected to be living with someone, and they talked easily with the directness of people who have stopped having patience for small talk. Other neighbors drifted in as summer deepened. There was a couple from the end of the block, Bernard and June, who were in their late 70s and still walked every evening after dinner. They had started stopping at the garden as a regular part of their route. Bernard had once, decades ago, worked in landscaping, and he had strong feelings about the placement of the peonies, which he shared with Lillian in a tone of gentle authority. Lillian agreed with him on most points and smiled to herself about the rest. June brought homemade lemonade one evening in late July, and somehow that became a thing they did. Someone brought something, and whoever happened to be there that evening sat on the bench or on the low stone wall Lillian had built along the path, and they talked while the fireflies came on in the dusk. Lillian still talked to George every morning. She told him about Ray and the trellis, about Dorothy's rosemary, about Bernard's opinions on the peonies. She told him the morning glories had done exactly what she'd hoped. Covered the fence in a wave of blue and purple that was so beautiful it almost hurt. She told him Diane had booked herself a ticket to Vermont for October, which made her feel proud in a way she hadn't expected. She told him she thought she understood now what he had always meant by paying attention, that paying attention was a form of love, really, the most common and underrated form, and that she was practicing it every day. She told him other things too, the weather, the coffee, what Carol had said that week, a dream she'd had, where he was sitting in the backyard with his weak coffee and a book, and when she woke she lay very still, trying to hold on to the particular quality of the afternoon light in it, the golden kind that comes in September and makes everything look like it's been kept somewhere safe. August was hot and still, and the garden was at its fullest, almost overwhelming. The roses still climbing, the cone flowers standing in their rows like those small, determined people. The black-eyed Susans in a great cheerful sweep along the south side, the lavender drawing bees all day in a low, contented hum. The morning glories covered the entire fence now, and in the early morning, before the heat came, they were the most extraordinary shade of blue, and Lillian would stand at the kitchen window with her coffee and look at them and feel something she could only call gratitude, though for what exactly? She would have been hard-pressed to say. For the blue, for the morning, for all of it. There was an evening in August, the kind of evening that feels like the last of summer, even if summer has weeks left in it, when 6 people were in the garden at once. Ray was on the bench. Dorothy had brought her cat in a carrier, which the cat was tolerating with great dignity. Bernard and June were there, A woman named Patricia had come by. She lived 2 houses down and had recently retired and was learning, she said, to have nowhere to be, which was harder than it sounded. And a young man named Owen, who rented the apartment above the Kowalski garage and was far from home in a way he tried not to show, had been passing and stopped because the light was beautiful and something about a garden full of people made him feel less whatever he was feeling. Lillian brought out a pitcher of sweet tea, and they sat in the fading August light and talked about things that didn't matter and things that mattered very much. And the fireflies came on one by one in the dusk, and somewhere down the block a screen door banged, and a child somewhere called out for someone, and the evening was very warm and smelled of lavender and roses and the particular sweetness of a day ending well. Owen, who was 24 and knew less about himself than he thought, said at one point quietly, not really to anyone, "I didn't know neighborhoods were like this." Ray looked at him. "Like what?" "Like this," Owen said again, and waved his hand at all of it, because he didn't have the words for what he meant, which was that he had not known that strangers could sit together in the evening in a garden and feel, for a little while, less alone. "They used to be," Bernard said. "They can be again." Lillian did not say anything. She was watching the morning glories fold themselves closed in the dusk, the way they always did at the end of the day, and she was thinking about George. She was thinking that he had always believed in the calm, undemonstrative way that he believed things, that people would show up for each other if given half a chance. He had believed this the way he believed in weather patterns and good coffee, and the particular pleasure of reading the last page of a satisfying book, steadily, without needing to argue it. She thought, "You were right. You were right, you quiet man." September came and the light changed, the way it always does in September. Angling in more sideways, turning gold, the shadows growing longer earlier. The first cool mornings arrived and the garden began its long, slow conversation with the changing season. Some things faded, some things deepened. The asters she had planted in a corner, almost as an afterthought, came into their full color now, purple and blue, and they were so lovely that Lillian stopped and looked at them for a long time on the morning they fully opened. She had added things to the garden that were not on George's list. Asters because she loved them. Ornamental grasses near the gate that moved in the wind in a way she found companionable. A little iron bench that Ray had found at a yard sale and painted green. A clay pot near the front that Carol had painted with Lillian's name. And a border of small flowers in the style of someone who loves you. She thought about how the garden had started as George's list and become something else, something larger. She had not planned for any of the people who had wandered in and left a small piece of themselves in it. But the garden had made room for all of it, the way living things make room, the way love makes room, when you let it. October arrived and Diane went to Vermont and called Lillian from a hillside where the trees were all on fire with color and said, "He would have loved this, Mom." And Lillian said, "He would have taken 17 photographs and not shown anyone." And they both laughed and both were crying a little. And the line between those two things was very thin, which is how it is when you love someone deeply enough to laugh and cry at the same time over a hillside in Vermont. The garden was going quiet now, the way gardens do in October. Lillian began the work of putting it to bed for winter, cutting things back, mulching the beds, wrapping the rose canes in burlap against the cold. Ray helped with the mulch. Dorothy came by on a Sunday afternoon, and they worked together in a companionable silence, the kind of silence that has known you long enough not to require filling. It was on one of those October afternoons that Carol came by and found her mother on her knees near the peony bush, which would bloom for the first time next spring if everything went well, and Lillian was talking, not to Carol, not to anyone Carol could see, just talking. in a low, easy voice, the way you talk to someone you are completely at home with. Carol stood at the edge of the garden and listened, not wanting to interrupt. "I think the peonies will be pink," Lillian was saying. "Bernard says they'll be white, but I think pink. We'll see in the spring." A pause. "Ray has been wonderful, by the way. You would like him. He has your father's way of doing things without making a fuss about it, which I appreciate." Another pause. "I miss you most in the evenings." "But I think you knew that." She pressed the mulch down around the base of the peony with gentle hands. "I'm going to be all right. I think you knew that too." Carol stood there with her hand over her mouth, not crying exactly, but somewhere near it, in that country, just adjacent to tears, where the air is very clean and everything looks more itself than usual. She had been worried all year about her mother. She had been watching for some loss of anchor, some drift into a grief too large to come back from. She had not expected to find this, a garden full of neighbors, full of flowers grown from a dead man's list. A mother on her knees in October, talking to the man she had loved for 50 years, telling him she would be all right. She let herself in through the garden gate quietly and crouched down beside her mother and put her hand over her mother's hand, and Lillian looked at her with calm eyes and said simply, "Oh, good. I was hoping you'd come." They stayed there for a while in the cooling October light. The morning glories had finished for the season. The fence was bare now, waiting. The coneflower heads had gone to seed, and the birds had been coming to them for weeks, goldfinches mostly, and one persistent chickadee. The lavender had been cut back and laid in bundles that Lillian had brought inside and hung in the kitchen, so the whole house smelled of it now. The rose canes were wrapped in their burlap, hunkered down, patient. "He left a list," Carol said, looking at the garden. "He left a list," Lillian agreed. "Of all of this? The bones of it. The rest grew." Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Why do you think he wrote it?" Lillian thought about that. She had thought about it many times in the past year. In the mornings while she worked, in the evenings while she sat on the bench after everyone had gone home, in the in-between moments of nights that were sometimes very long. She did not think George had written it as any kind of instruction or message or plan. He was not that kind of man. He did not think in those large, dramatic shapes. She thought he had probably written it on an ordinary afternoon, the way you write things down when your mind is moving and you want to hold on to a thought. Maybe he had been looking at the yard and thinking it could be something. Maybe he had been thinking about his father's name in the middle of a sweet William, or about that July sky over Lake Michigan, or about morning glories on a fence. She thought he had probably folded the paper and put it in the bird book and forgotten about it, the way you do with lists that are really just the shape of a daydream. But he had been paying attention all along, and he had left the evidence of it behind, tucked in a book about birds, in a coffee can full of seeds, in the way his daughters knew how to listen and his wife knew how to keep going. He had left a light on, in the quiet, unintentional way of a man who did not make speeches about the things he loved, but loved them completely. "I don't think he meant for me to plant it," Lillian said. "I think I just needed a reason to keep talking to him." And it was there. She looked at the garden, the bare fence where the morning glories would come back in spring, the peony that would be pink, she was certain of it, the rose canes in their burlap, waiting for March. "And it turned into something else," she said. "It turned into something else," Carol agreed. What it had turned into was a place, not just Lillian's place or George's place, the kind of place that a street needs and does not always know it needs, where the loneliness of being a particular age in a particular life could be set down for a while. Ray, who had been slowly disappearing into his house since the hip surgery, came out every day now. Dorothy had stopped being someone who lived across the street and become a friend. which is one of the more profound transformations available to a person. Owen had knocked on Lillian's door in September to ask if she needed anything brought from the store, and she had said yes and handed him a list, and they had been doing that every week since. The block had not changed. The people were the same people with the same lives and the same Tuesday mornings, but a garden had come into being in the front yard of the cream house with the green shutters, and something had opened alongside it, the way something always opens when there's a living thing to gather around. Lillian thought about that in November, when the garden was put to bed and the yard looked bare, and the dark came early. She had begun it entirely for George. Every plant a conversation, every morning in the dirt, a way of keeping some door of her heart propped open to him. She had not planned for Ray to build a trellis, or Dorothy to bring Rosemary or young Owen to knock on her door with a grocery list. But love is strange that way. You aim it at one person, the one person you cannot stop loving, and it illuminates more than you intended. It lights up the whole street if you let it. She told George this on a November morning, standing at the kitchen window with her coffee, looking out at the bare yard where the garden would come back in spring. "You always said that about the post office," she said, "that when you delivered one letter, you never knew how far the words would go." She watched a sparrow land on the empty feeder she hadn't gotten around to filling yet. "I think this is like that." The sparrow stayed a moment, found nothing, and flew off toward the oak tree. Lillian set down her cup and went to find the birdseed. In February, almost exactly 1 year from the day she had driven in the first stake, the seed catalogs arrived. She had not ordered them. They came on their own, the way they always do. And she sat at the kitchen table with her reading glasses and George's piece of paper and went through them carefully, making small notations in the margins in her own handwriting, alongside his. She was planning the second year of it. More morning glories, a deep garnet red this time, another rose, white for the other side of the trellis, a cutting garden in the back corner, because she wanted flowers to bring inside and flowers to give away, and flowers for the table when Ray came for dinner, which he did now on Thursdays. A larger herb section near the porch, because Dorothy had mentioned wanting to learn to cook with herbs, and Lillian had offered to teach her, and that has somehow become a plan. She sat at the table for a long time that February morning, planning the second year of George's garden, and she was happy. Not the uncomplicated happiness of someone who has nothing to grieve, but the deeper, quieter happiness of someone who has found a way to live alongside grief without being swallowed by it. The light came through the kitchen window at the angle it comes in winter, low and clear, and it fell across the seed catalogs and the piece of paper with George's handwriting on it, which was beginning to soften at the folds from being opened so many times. Lillian smoothed it carefully with one finger, the way you are careful with something you want to last. "More roses," she wrote in the margin, "for the fence." And then, in the smaller handwriting she used when she was writing, just for herself, just for the record, he was right about the morning glories. Outside on Birch Street, the February morning was gray and cold, and the yard was bare and waiting. But the seeds were already ordered, the plans were already made, the rose canes under their burlap were already invisibly beginning. Spring was coming. It always comes. And when it did, the garden would be there, larger than last year, more various, full of things grown from a list and full of things grown from everything that came after the list. The conversations and the silences and the evenings full of fireflies and sweet tea and people who had needed a place to be and found one. A light left on, that was all it was. That was everything it was. Lillian put the catalogs away and washed her cup and put on George's flannel gloves, which she kept on the hook by the back door, and she went outside into the February cold to check on the roses. They were fine. They were waiting. They were going to be beautiful. There is something that happens in a life when grief, which at first feels like nothing but loss, begins slowly, tenderly, without any announcement, to become something else. Not replacement. Nothing replaces what is gone, but a kind of composting, perhaps, where the loss breaks down into the soil of the life that continues, and things grow from it that could not have grown otherwise. Richer things sometimes, things with deeper roots. Lillian Marsh did not set out to become someone whose front yard was a gathering place, whose garden was a living record of a quiet man's attentions, whose mornings were a continuing conversation with the person she had loved longest. She set out only to plant a rose in February because she needed something to do with her hands and something to say out loud. And the ground was there, half frozen, but willing. What grew was more than she planned for. Most of the best things are. And on Birch Street, through the seasons that followed, the garden went on being itself, beautiful and particular, full of the specific gravity of a real place made by real hands out of real love. The morning glories came back every June. The peonies bloomed pink in May, as Lillian had predicted, and Bernard came to look at them without saying a word, which was the most gracious concession available to him. The roses climbed and opened and filled the evening air with something sweet and faintly wild, and Ray sat on the bench in the long summer light, and Dorothy brought things, and Owen brought groceries on Thursdays, and Carol came every Sunday, and the block went on being a block full of people making the best of their particular lives. And every morning in the early quiet before the day began, before the neighbors arrived and the bees came to the lavender and the street filled up with its ordinary sounds, Lillian was in the garden, on her knees, or standing at the edge of it with her coffee, or moving slowly along the stone path, with her hands in George's flannel gloves, talking to him, telling him what was growing, keeping the light on. There is a garden on Birch Street that does not know it is remarkable. It does not know that people slow down to look at it, or that a young man far from home feels less lonely when he passes it in the evening, or that a woman named Dorothy, who had learned to need very little, found herself needing it more than she expected. It does not know that it began with grief and became something for which grief does not have quite the right name. It only knows how to grow. It only knows to turn toward the light and hold the water and come back in spring, which is perhaps everything a garden needs to know. Tonight, if you find yourself thinking about someone who is gone, someone whose handwriting you've kept, whose voice you still reach for, whose chair sits empty in a particular way, I hope you know that the love does not have to end when the presence does. It has to go somewhere. Sometimes it goes into the ground, into something living, into a corner of the world that quietly becomes more itself because of what you brought to it. George Marsh left a list in a bird book, and his wife planted it, and a street was warmed by it. None of them could have told you how it happened. It happened the way spring happens, the way one quiet, stubborn act of love opens into something larger than itself and goes on opening for as long as there are hands willing to tend it. Thank you for spending this hour with me. If you'd like more stories like this one, subscribe, and I'll leave the light on for you next time. Rest well.